Let's start with the name itself. Before any European flags were ever planted here, the name Texas actually came from the Caddo people. It means friends or allies, which is, when you think about it, a pretty beautiful and kind of ironic starting point for a place that was about to be fought over for centuries. And that history of being fought over brings us right to the famous Six Flags of Texas, which is really the perfect framework for this story. Just look at this timeline. The power shifts here are just wild. You go from Spain to France for a hot minute, then to Mexico, then for a little while it was its own country, the Republic of Texas, then the Confederacy, and finally, of course, the United States. It's a history defined by constant, relentless change. So here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with the folks who were there first, then dive into the clash of European empires, watch the birth of the Lone Star Republic, and finally trace how it became the absolute megastate we know today. All right, first up, land of many peoples. And we have to start here, because long before any Europeans showed up, this land already had a history stretching back more than 10,000 years. I mean, just look at the diversity of cultures here. This was not an empty land, not by a long shot. You had sophisticated farmers like the Caddo in the east, the Pueblo peoples out west, different tribes all along the coast, the Apache on the plains. And then talk about a major player, the Comanche, who arrived and built this incredible empire that really dominated the whole region for more than a century. Okay, so that brings us to the era of European competition. For Spain, France, and later Mexico, Texas was this huge strategic prize, just waiting to be claimed. So get this, Spain maps the coast way back in 1519 and then basically ignores the place for over 160 years. So what changed? Well, a Frenchman named La Salle accidentally lands there, builds a fort, and suddenly alarm bells are just ringing in Mexico City. France is here, and that's what really kicked off the colonization race. Spain rushes to build missions, which weren't just churches, they were military and cultural outposts, found in key places like San Antonio. But then, fast forward to 1821, Mexico wins its independence from Spain, and congrats, you've just inherited this massive, mostly empty territory. So if you're Mexico, what do? You've got this huge frontier you need to populate and control. The answer? The impresario system. Basically, they offered huge chunks of land to guys like Stephen F. Austin. Their job was to go out and recruit American settlers to come live there. Mexico figured, hey, these guys will be a great buffer against Native American raids and help us lock down our claim. And boy, did it work. Maybe a little too well. By 1834, you've got 30,000 Anglo-American settlers. Compare that to just 7,800 Mexican Tejanos. That's a huge shift, almost 4-to-1. And it wasn't just about the numbers. These new settlers brought their own language, their own ideas about government, and crucially, they brought slaves, which was a major point of conflict with Mexico, who had restricted slavery. You can just feel the tension building, right? The stage was absolutely set for a revolution. And that revolution brings us right here to the Lone Star Republic, the incredible story of Texas fighting to become its very own country. The Texas Revolution was really forged in fire, born from these absolutely brutal defeats. The Alamo, the massacre at Goliad, these were devastating losses. But they didn't break the revolutionaries. They did the opposite. They created this powerful, emotional rallying cry that just fueled their fight for independence. And that fight came to a head at the Battle of San Jacinto. And this is just incredible. In 18 minutes. That's it, 18 minutes. Sam Houston's army completely crushes Santa Anna's forces, and they even capture the Mexican president himself. That one battle, it basically ended the war and created the Republic of Texas. Just like that. But, okay, winning independence is one thing. Figuring out what to do with it, that's another story. The new republic was totally split on what its future should be. On one side, you had Sam Houston's group. They were thinking, let's join the U.S., let's try to make peace with the Native American tribes. Then, on the other side, you had Maribor Lamar's faction. They had a completely different vision, a huge independent Texas empire stretching all the way to the Pacific. And a big part of that vision was the forceful removal of all Native peoples. Well, in the end, Houston's vision of joining the U.S. won out. And that brings us to our next chapter, statehood and the Civil War, a time when Texas finally joins the Union, only to turn around and leave it just 16 years later. So in 1845, it's official. Texas becomes the 28th state. But here's the problem. Mexico had never accepted that Texas was independent, so from their point of view, the U.S. annexing Texas was a straight-up act of aggression. It all came down to a border dispute. Was the border the Nueces River or the Rio Grande? That disagreement is what lit the fuse for the Mexican-American War. Now, this right here is a really important snapshot of what Texas looked like right before the Civil War. Think about that. 30% of the entire population was enslaved African Americans. The economy, especially the big cotton plantations in East Texas, was completely dependent on their labor. And that economic reality, that dependence on slavery, is the #1 reason why Texas voted to secede from the Union in 1861. So, after the Civil War and the whole Reconstruction period, Texas is still mostly about farming and ranching. But something was about to happen that would change everything. And I mean everything. This is the era of oil booms and growth. Now, to be fair, the economy was already starting to diversify a bit in the late 1800s. You had the classic cattle drives, the railroads were booming and connecting Texas to the rest of the country, there was a big timber industry. All of that was important, for sure. But it was all just the opening act for the main event in 1901. And here it is, the event that completely remade Texas, the oil gusher at Spindletop. Look, this wasn't just some oil find. This was like a geological explosion. It produced more oil than all the other wells in the world combined. That is just mind-boggling. It kicked off the Texas oil boom and single-handedly turned the state from a place of farms and ranches into an economic and industrial powerhouse that would dominate the 20th century. And that massive shift, that black gold revolution, brings us to our final section today, modern Texas. A state still defined by unbelievably rapid change and a really complex future. Okay, so let's walk through the forces that shaped the 20th century for Texas. First, World War II. The huge amount of federal money that poured in during the war literally pulled people off the farms and into the cities, and those cities just boomed. Then you have the Civil Rights era in the 60s, which finally brought an end to segregation and the old Jim Crow laws. At the same time, the state's politics started a massive realignment, going from being solidly Democratic for 100 years to the Republican stronghold it's known as today. And finally, the economy started to move beyond just oil. It branched out into tech, healthcare, finance, creating the diverse, modern megastate we see now. So when you think about it, the entire story of Texas is one of constant, radical transformation. From indigenous land to colonial prize, from its own republic to a state, from a rural place to this urban giant. And as its population keeps changing and its economy keeps evolving, it really makes you wonder, what's next? The only thing that seems certain is that the next chapter of the Texas story will be just as dynamic and probably just as contested as its past. Hey, if you want to see how this incredible story stacks up against other states, definitely check out the rest of our U.S. State Histories playlist. And if you enjoyed this explainer, be sure to subscribe to Notebook Summaries for more deep dives just like this one. Thanks so much for watching.